It is a great honor for me to report on the TUMU exhibition in this event today. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very sorry that I can't be in Hong Kong today. I will look back to the turn of the century from around 1996 to 2001, the year in which the exhibition titled TUMU Young Architecture from China was shown at EDIS Architecture Forum in Berlin. I will try to explain the background for the selection of participants at this show, and I will try to give you an idea where our knowledge about the younger generation of Chinese architects came from. The title TUMU, literally Earth and Wood, was proposed by Junho Chang, who also was responsible for the design of an installation of a ramped earth wall at EDIS Architecture Forum in Berlin. I will come back to this issue later again. The calligraphy was made by one of the sons of Ma Qingyun. In 1996, my wife Jennifer Meitzner received a commission for a small housing compound for German experts in a rural setting in Shandong province, commissioned by the German company Siemens. As a trained urban designer and landscape architect, I joined for the design of the garden. For the architectural detailing, Jennifer was joined by Claudia Funk. Both went to Shandong province to detail the complex on site. This was done to incorporate local wisdom and to make sure that the plans would be executed according to detailing. And detailing was very precise for local Chinese standards. The local construction company understood this project as an opportunity for qualification, and they tried their best to follow the plans. Only with the interior they got lost and had to hire a second company who had a more refined experience with carpentry. However, the outcome was quite okay, even we had many difficulties to communicate technical issues. For some years the compound was used by German experts and then Chinese families moved in. Since then, I have been very interested in developments in China and have organized exchange programs and discussions together with colleagues. In this context, I have also taken an interest in new developments. In February 1999, I was co-organizer for a Sino-German conference titled The Chinese City, which was the first exchange with architects from the Architecture Society of China in Berlin. By then, I was member of the board of the Society Stadtkultur International, who was the host in Berlin. There I met the Beijing-based architect Bu Zhengwei. He was editor for the magazine New Architecture and immediately published our project in Shandong province. The exhibition Cities on the Move, curated by Hans-Ulrich Obrist and Hu Hanwu, was shown between 1997 and 1999 in Vienna, Bordeaux, New York and London. The catalogue included early projects by Junho Chang and a text by Wang Mingxian. This was probably the first time that urban developments in the People's Republic were presented in parallel with developments in urban cultures in other Asian countries from a rather artistic point of view. But being interested in the topic, this was a very welcome insight. In June 1999, during UIA Congress in Beijing, I negotiated a 5-year cooperation between the Architecture Society of China and the Society Stadtkultur International in Berlin. The agreement stated that we would exchange around 10 architects from China and 10 architects from Germany each year to learn from each other in different fields of the architectural practice. During the UIA Congress, many new publications on contemporary architectural production in China came out, some of them better, others rather mediocre. By chance, I also came across an exhibition at the National Museum in Beijing that showed some new aspects of architectural critique, but it was closed right after the opening and moved to a remote location. I learned about this only much later. The projects in the usual publications were illustrated often with renderings, not exactly inspiring. Architectural projects were huge and very formal, often without scale and detailing. Jung-Ho Chang and Atelier Feichang Qianzu had already published the first monograph in 1996, albeit almost exclusively without built projects. A+D, a magazine published in Hong Kong, was also sold in Beijing during UIA Congress. I was very excited when I discovered the first works published by Liu Chiakun. Together with works of Jung-Ho Chang, Liu Chiakun's projects showed that something new was in the making. In 2000, a friend arranged a meeting with Liu Chiakun in Berlin. I immediately remembered the publication from the previous year, and I was very fascinated to learn more about his ideas. Around UIA Congress in Beijing, many foreign magazines published about the development in China and showed almost exclusively foreign architects and their projects. The only exception was again Jung-Ho Chang. I also found publications by Wang Mingxian on the new avant-garde in architecture. However, the projects shown were all unbuilt. At the beginning of 2000, the first congress with German and Chinese architects and planners was held at Shenzhen University about public space. Already on the trip to the UIA Congress in summer 1999, I was commissioned together with Ulf Meyer as a consultant for the exhibition project Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, the city of the 21st century, which was shown in 2000 at the Bauhaus in Dessau and the Kunsthalle in Kehl. The curators were urbanist Kai Vöckler and art historian Dirk Luko. We looked at the architecture and architects of the cities mentioned and made suggestions as to what should be shown in this field. The exhibition was documented in a bilingual catalogue in which the selected architects are included. Against the backdrop of the level of knowledge about local architects and the strong fixation on foreign architects by Western media, it was important to me to show which local architects had left their mark with interesting projects in the three cities. The idea was to create a basis for an architectural discourse from which we could depart for further explorations. Of course, this included Jung-Ho Chang and Atelier Feichang Qianzu, who was represented with two projects. One was the well-known bookstore in which parts of bicycles were reused. The second was the Morningside Center for Mathematics, which has just been completed, both in Beijing. We also showed the Foreign Language Institute in Beijing, designed by Chui Kai. It was a complex building with postmodern echoes. Or the Youth Palace in Shenzhen, which had not yet been built. I mentioned Wu Zhengwei already. He had built a small local cultural center in a park in Beijing. There were two circular buildings connected by pergolas that extended into the park. What impressed me about Wu's buildings was the rough plaster for the surface, which stood out from the normally tiled buildings, which showed no signs of aging. But also proportion and scale were important in these buildings. Guan Zhaoye had built a red brick library on the campus of Tsinghua University in the early 1990s, which blended into the existing urban fabric. We also showed the UR Hutong housing development in Beijing, which was planned by Wu Liangyong with reference to the old hutongs. And we included Huang Hui's residential buildings, which carefully preserved the scale of the urban neighborhood. I would like to make it clear that we choose the architects for our TUMU exhibition at the EDIS Architecture Forum in Berlin very consciously. When we developed the exhibition in spring 2001, I already had a complex idea of the trends of contemporary architecture in China. I had seen projects by Chui Kai, by Beijing Institute of Architectural Development, and buildings by unnamed architects, as well as the very sleek buildings of Qiqin in Beijing, and many others also in other cities. It was very clear what we did not want for this exhibition at EDIS: the projects of the big state offices which often build on an uncontrollable scale, and we searched for architects who worked on alternative ideas about material and space. After visiting Jung-Ho Chang during the UIA Congress in 1999 and after meeting Liu Jiakun by chance in Berlin in 2000, it was clear to us that new tendencies were becoming visible that we definitely wanted to show. And we were sure that if there are two very good architects we already knew in such a large country, then there must be more with whom we could put together an exhibition. We asked both Jung-Ho Chang and Liu Jiakun for recommendations. Together with Wolf Meyer, I wrote a proposal and took it to Hans-Jürgen Kommerell from the EDIS Architecture Forum in Berlin, who immediately agreed and took care of the financing. Jung-Ho suggested calling the exhibition TUMU, literally earth and wood. This historical term for architecture in China was replaced by Jianzu in the 20th century, a term that has an undertone from German Bauen, which came via Japan to China. TUMU specifically reflects the Chinese idea of building materials and thus tradition. This name was therefore also contrary to the professional practice in contemporary architecture and thus set itself apart from the Jianzu architects. For the exhibition, after a round trip from Beijing to Chengdu, Nanjing, Shanghai, Hangzhou and Suzhou, and we had earlier visited Shenzhen and Guangzhou, we finally selected the participants. In Beijing, we invited Atelier Feijiang Jianzu, of course. In April 2001, they were just engaged in the setting up of first Liangshijing Biennale of Architectural Design, curated by Wang Mingxian. Besides the invaluable help in collecting the material of the invited architects in Beijing, Jung-Ho proposed an installation of a ramped earth wall in the exhibition space in Berlin. I just show now briefly some projects we selected for the exhibition without discussing them in detail. Here we see the buildings for the Tsinghua University by Atelier Feijiang Jianzu in the coastal city of Qingdao. Another project was the villa made with ramped earth walls and timber construction at the so-called commune at the Great Wall near Beijing, which was also designed by Atelier Feijiang Jianzu. We included artist Ai Weiwei. Japanese architect Shigeru Ban, who also had a project at the commune at the Great Wall, had seen his Beijing home and told Hans-Jürgen Kommerell from EDIS that we should visit him. We were deeply impressed by his engagement with traditional craft and how he transformed it in useless furniture he reconstructed. But also his concrete fountain was impressive and was shown in the exhibition with a metal model besides sketches and photos. Most impressive was his own house, which he had built for himself. It was a simple volume made of grey bricks and was also represented with a metal model in the exhibition. We met Liu Jiakun in Chengdu, and he took us to several building sites and to small workshops where they prepared mock-ups for some of his upcoming projects. We also visited the first villas he had built for friends in the countryside and the building site for the Buddhist museum, which was not yet started. Most impressive was the space arrangement and the surface materiality of the youth camp in the countryside. The rough plastering and the coloring reminded me to think about the buildings of Luis Barragan. However, here the coloring was adapted to the grayish light of Sichuan. From Chengdu we went to Nanjing, where we met with young professors at the Nanjing University's newly opened architectural department. We were aware that they all worked under the cover of the university and that all of them had been in Zurich for an extra educational program where they obviously learned about Swiss efficiency and straightforward design. We selected works by Zhu Jingqian, Ding Wowo, Wang Chunyang and Zhang Lei. Zhang Lei by then had already quite a few projects in his portfolio, which we could present in Berlin, whereas others had their projects still under construction, like Wang and Ding. In Shanghai, we met Ma Qingyun for a second time. We had first met him in Beijing, where he showed us an apartment sales office he had designed. He came back from the US after winning a competition for a multi-purpose building in Ningbo. Ma brought us there and showed us further projects, which included a huge university under construction. The new campus he was planning had the size of a typical Chinese project, which we initially did not want to show. However, in his case, we made an exception because he was very conceptual, and it seemed that he could control all the oddities that occur in such a project. In Shanghai, we met Tong Ming, and he connected us with Wang Shu. Also in Shanghai, someone told us that there is a cafe, gallery, room with a view designed by Wang Shu, in which they had just an exhibition on 5 young architects, among them Jungho Chang, Wang Shu, Liu Jiakun, and Zhu Jingtian, which we also had selected for our exhibition. We went there on our own and had a look. Next day, Tong Ming drove us with his car to Suzhou, where we met Wang Shu at the newly finished library at a college. The library in Suzhou was a surprise to us. It was a white, clean volume hovering above the pond and completely transparent towards the water. However, we could see some references to John Haechuk's ideas of follies, which Wang Shu had seen in publications. He had never left China by then, and coming to Berlin was his first trip to a foreign country, for which we had to provide a letter of recommendation to get him a passport. For the Berlin exhibition, we included an unbuilt proposal for a studio and some odd miniature follies in his flat. The exhibition was part of the Asia-Pacific Weeks in Berlin, a biennial event launched in 1997. In its third edition, in 2001, the People's Republic of China was given a platform for a wide-ranging official cultural program, which consisted in part of folk presentations. This was when the challenges began, challenges we had not foreseen. Our exhibition was intended to represent the country in the field of architecture in Germany, making our selection highly sensitive. None of the architects, and certainly not the artist Ai Weiwei, were registered with the Architecture Society of China. Their relatively modest projects had been realized in a legal gray area of private design services, which, beyond a certain scale, required collaboration with a state-certified firm for implementation. We had arranged with the German coordinators of the cultural program that the architectural models and presentation materials would be shipped in a joint container for the event. The Chinese side had agreed to cover participants' airfare, while we would cover expenses in Berlin. Then came an unexpected message. The State Council Information Office, the official body for the whole cultural program in Berlin, refused to allow the transportation of the grades, claiming the architectural materials were not part of the official program. To us, it was clear that someone objected to the idea that these unregistered architects would be representing the country abroad. I contacted a staff member I knew at the Architecture Society directly. He promptly faxed back to say that we absolutely should have consulted him beforehand, but that it was still possible to do so retroactively. I was to travel to Beijing in July 2001 on invitation of the Architecture Society anyway for our joint exchange program. And so they told me I could freely select suitable representatives from a very long list of master architects. He was not convinced by my argument that the participants we had selected would contribute to positively changing the international perception of contemporary Chinese architecture. Only when I reminded him on our long-standing collaboration and of the German-Chinese architecture exchange we had co-conceived and successfully organized over the previous 2 years, did he agree to support the project as planned. Nevertheless, there were deep reservations on the Chinese side about whether these architects were appropriate representatives of the nation. But the German side, too, expressed significant concern. A high-ranking cultural official from the Berlin Senate even warned Edis Architecture Forum's project manager to make sure not to invite any dissidents. Due to lack of space in the exhibition and in the catalogue, we were able to convince Bauwelt magazine to produce a special issue on the offices on display, which Ulf Meyer and I supervised as guest editors. This allowed us to show the interested audience the maximum amount of new projects designed by the selected architects. For critics in Germany and Europe, this exhibition was an absolute sensation, as no one had previously associated such project with China. This marked a breakthrough, and subsequent publications and exhibitions drew on a pool of architects who were then often published and exhibited. In 2002, the TUMU at Home exhibition was shown in Shanghai. The initiative came from Ma Qingyun and Bu Bing, who supervised the event and a symposium on site. Thank you very much for your attention.
Edward?
Yes?
Can you hear me? This is Cole Roskam.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. Can we project?
Can you see me?
We can't see you yet, but soon. There we go.
Okay.
So we just all
Fantastic.
heard your recording, and if you had any further reflection or conclusions you wanted to share with us now, go ahead.
Yes. I just want to say a few words. I'm very sorry that I can't be in Hong Kong today, but what I want to include now is that from that point onwards, I was doing research because I was convinced that these new developments have to be reconnected to the history of development in China after 1949. And I found some architects where I saw references to this kind of architecture, which were designed by these young architects. And so I made contact with Shang Kuo, for instance, and also with Feng Shizong to discuss with them their own contribution to the development in China. But both of them were very unhappy, and they were feeling that the administration had blocked their own development. But for me, it was extremely important to see that it is not an isolated development which we can see after 2000, but that there are always traces going back into history, and that it is important to develop a narrative which connects these developments. It even starts earlier. You could see it in the 1930s with architects like Xi Fuchuan or Xia Xiangxi in the 1950s and 60s in Guangzhou, where they tried to connect or reflect on the climate and on the possibilities of construction, and also on references from local sources. So this was actually very important for me to understand that we do have to develop a narrative, an historic narrative that connects the young architects not only to the global developments on the one hand, but also reconnects to the history in architectural development within the People's Republic.
Okay, great, wonderful, thank you. With that, and I hope you'll stay with us, but I'll introduce our third speaker and invite him to come up to the lectern, Professor Wang.